So Ivan, thank you so much for joining us on your morning in the UK. I'm really excited to chat, and yeah, thanks so much for being a guest.
Thank you for the opportunity and for staying later as well there in Australia.
Not too late. Yeah, no, it's all good. It's only 7 p.m, so I'll manage. I
Right.
won't be falling asleep just yet. We've got a lot to go through. I've got quite a few different topics to cover with you, and I think you've got a lot of interesting views and insight that you can provide to our listeners. So before we get up and running with what you do today and what your journeys look like, I like to start right at the beginning. And what was it that you wanted to do when you were growing up?
Sure. When I was growing up in Venezuela, I wanted to be like Michael Jordan, really. I played basketball, so I wanted to play basketball. So that's kind of the first thing I wanted to be, right? But I also wanted to be like my dad. So he's a electronics and communications engineer. So yeah, I always liked the technology, on the gadgets, even though in the 80s there weren't that many. But at home we had the first, mobile phones, the bricks, and we had the first things like that always, um, kind of before everyone else. And so I've been into that for forever, I guess.
Yeah. So was that just something that that you had from an early age, like a passion you found, and how did that continue into your early career, moving away from being a basketball fanatic to then a more realistic career in terms of not being maybe the next Michael Jordan, because there aren't many out there that can. But how did
Yeah,
you take that passion and turn that into a career?
sure. I kind of still want to be Jordan, but well, let's talk about it later. Um, no, so realistically, yeah. So in school, right? So we started when the years came, right? We started getting like computer science kind of classes, very very basic. We did like logos and some Excel and things like that, but we also did some programming in very old languages like QBasic and Fox Pro and things like that. So I really liked that. I really, really, really enjoyed that programming. So that's when I started kind of switching back to maybe not electronics, more like software, right? More like programming. And it just kind of grew from there. Um, and I decided to, as we get along, I kind of played with things here and there, some like web development, very early web development, like learning HTML and things like that, before I kind of got into the uh, selecting my career, like my university degree, and I went for computer science engineering. So and it's growing still.
Yeah. So what was it that you were first passionate about software engineering? Like, what was it that kind of got your attention and made you kind of want to build a career in that space?
Sure, like when I was a kid, it was about the logic, the way of thinking, the logic of programming, the algorithms and stuff. So I truly loved how from thinking to seeing something run and execute what they told it to do. I found that like really fascinating, right? Then right when I was getting into like uni and stuff like that, it was more about, first of all, growing career area. Like it was, and it still is, computer science as a whole, kind of the future, right? So I said I want to get into that action a little bit. So I wanna know more about that. That was kind
Sure.
of the
So you
yeah.
studied computer science, and then from leaving university, what was your earlier career in the real world outside of studying?
Yeah, of course. So even during university, like on summers, I wouldn't really go to holidays or anything like that. I would kind of do internships and work as freelance. I did some very ugly, I have to, like, thinking back now, web pages. That's when I knew that like graphics and design on that, you like colors and pictures, that wasn't my cup of tea, really. I'm not good at it, but they were very robust and very scalable and reliable. So okay, that part is good. So the technology behind it, the infrastructure, the the hosting, the everything, that's what I was doing. And then I that's kind of the first things I did were that freelance websites for kind of friends or friends of friends kind of thing. And then I did the internships. So in my university, we had two different types of internship, one shorter, one longer one as part of the career, as part of the degree. So instead of a thesis, it was more of an internship with a case study and all of that. So that was really interesting because you got some work experience, and as well, I was working already from previous summers it was an e-commerce kind of website e-commerce development company, a group of companies actually. There were three of them, kind of focusing on different areas. But anyway, I started with one, and then I did my internship with another one of those company, and the second internship was bigger. It was like an e-commerce platform. We wanted to build the next eBay, but in Venezuela. It kind of got started, but eBay took over, kind of. Actually, yeah, before it was there. So yeah, it was really really interesting, but it was definitely as a programmer, as a initially like Java or .NET interchangeably. I did even some stuff in the university for the university, so for the database department in in the computer science campus. So I did IT governance project for them. That was like using not just me, but me and a group of friends, I guess. We did that. So that was really cool. But yeah, that was the bulk of it. Well, yeah, as an aside, I did some teacher assistant role. Like I taught the labs in one of the subjects there in the university. So I was in charge of like 30% of the grades for some people.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they didn't feel as good about it as I did, I guess.
Have you bumped into any of them since on projects?
No, not really. So I remember that I did see one of them in one of our Christmas parties. She's living here in the UK. She's a wife of a she's the wife of a guy that I went to school with as well. But she didn't even remember that I taught her that lab. And yeah, I think I did. But anyway, I haven't really seen no one else. Yeah, maybe they're still in Venezuela. Maybe they're somewhere else in the world. I don't know.
Sure. So how did you go from that point then into the Salesforce ecosystem? And can you remember, having done a lot of software engineering and lots of kind of touch on different languages, can you remember what you first thought of Salesforce?
Yeah, of course. So we're kind of still in Venezuela in my story. But then eventually I moved to Spain. So after I graduated from uni, I did I did a stint in project management. I realized project management wasn't my thing. I thought it was like a move up from being a dev, but it wasn't really. It was really a good time in a really good company, and I did some dev and some kind of things as well. But the project management part I didn't like. But in a way, I kind of started in CRM. That was a CRM company. It was we built bespoke CRM in .NET for many companies, like including Microsoft and so on. But we did for like little pieces of their processes, right? So that was really cool. But Venezuela was already in a kind of in a tough state, right? So I was planning on moving out of Venezuela, and I got the opportunity to go to Spain. So I moved to Madrid and I started working with Civil. So that's my first kind of foray into, okay, this is a package CRM. This is a completely different than Salesforce, of course. Not a fan, I have to say, but I did enjoy and I did learn a lot, like of the move to Spain and all of that. So in Spain, I had a great time. So, but 2 years after I moved to Spain, there was this opportunity. Like my line manager in the company said, like, look at Salesforce. There's this kind of training. It was actually a printed copy of, yeah, I don't know if you remember the partner training sessions that were like a Java applet that went step by step. So it was a printout of those screens. It was like this thick. It's like, okay, I can take a look at that. I'm not sure how it works, but let's take a look. So I started reading, and I thought, okay, this looks very interesting. And I got a dev org, and I started playing with things, and like, okay, yeah, this is very good. So in comparison with Civil, it was like a new world, like completely new world, and I wasn't used to doing a lot of clicks, not code, and in Civil was all in the database, was all in different apps, and it was really hard to deploy something. You have to deploy the whole thing all the time. It was very complex. So I really enjoyed like click new field, click new screen. Even though it was early days, so it was like what 11 years ago or something like that. Well, no, early days for me, but still, it was very different than it is now. It was sales service, not much more. Maybe chatter was coming up.
Yeah.
So
But the
don't.
interesting
Yeah.
thing, the interesting thing is you were from a software, you're a computer science guy, right? You're from a software engineering background. And a lot of, even now, a lot of people we see that we're trying to get into the market, they don't want to come into the market because of the whole clicks not code concept.
Okay, yeah, I agree with that, but the thing you also have to see is that I came from Civil, which was completely everything was complex. So when I saw that clicks not code, I kind of thought, wow, this is great, but um, not for a career change back then. Yes, this is good, this is great. You can build some stuff, but what if I need to write like something when a field changes, like a trigger or stuff, and then it started getting tricky because Apex was, at least I thought, was very young, immature, and there were still S controls hanging around there, and a little bit of the JavaScript buttons, and I like, okay, that this part is less interesting. So I was in two minds, but I did go into the Salesforce products and project, sorry, and I started to really like it, but I didn't know how to make the best of it. And then the company I worked for, they brought, I don't know if you met him, but it's very famous guy called Peter Chittum. He was an instructor back then. He's now like a developer evangelist at Salesforce. He was an instructor back then. So we booked the course, and it was Peter who came, and he came to do the course for developer 401 and 501, like the old developer and advanced developer, kind of combined in a week. Very, very, but it was very good. So that's when I actually did, okay, now I know how to write Apex. Now I know how to really write, like work with collections and work with this. And I know what happens when I click this and that, and how Salesforce works in the background, the multi-tenancy of it, a little bit of it. And Visualforce, even though I'm not a huge fan, but you could customize everything now. Now I started getting the idea more, and that's when I did, okay, I want to continue in here. Before that, I
And
was in two minds, but after the course with Peter, that was like definitely.
did you enjoy writing Apex and because I mean, I'm not technical, right? So I don't know the Siebel world, but I understand a lot of there are some frustrations with Apex. And if you compare it to some other languages and frameworks that are out there, there are some limitations and the governor limits and things like that. Was that a frustration for you initially?
Sure. So say Siebel, it has its own kind of language as well. I don't remember the name now, but it has like one place where you do like your what would be your Apex, and one place where you did your JavaScript. But it was very, very limited as well. A lot more limited than Apex, because Apex, when I got into Apex, then you could see how it was not quite, but it was like Java, and like the definitions and everything, and the ways you could use it, and the batch classes, and asynchronous, all of that. And it's like, okay, this is a lot better. But I do agree that to like move from one place to the other, like to do the whole continuous integration, and to do the major like scalable development, that was lacking. It's kind of still not 100% there, I have to be honest, but it's changed a lot and it's improved a lot. But that was the only part where I found the limitations jarring, I guess. The part of the governor limits, though, I kind of like it. So because it changes your view, right, on how to write a piece of code. I actually think that the concept behind it and how it's multi-tenant and how everyone's sharing is great. But apart from that, it's also about minimizing the resource you're consuming. So if you're gonna do something, do it efficiently and with the minimum effort for the machines, right? For the infrastructure. And I think that should apply to everything, because things that we sometimes forget when we have no limits is that we sometimes, not always, and there are of course best practices and so on, but sometimes we don't care a lot if we're doing some things inefficiently because that's rarely used or something. With governor limits, your focus, and you have to do things efficiently and again, if you follow the best practices and everything, but it changes your mindset. So I think that's a very, very interesting thing.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. So how did you go from being a developer and getting your head around development and enjoying being a developer to then becoming an architect? Like what, because everyone wants to make that transition and everyone's in such a rush to do it. But what did you do to make that transition?
Sure. The main part, I guess, is the least exciting one, is experience. And the more projects I got into, even in Spain, like I knew that just being a developer and not having control or a say in what was the design, what were the timelines. I didn't set timelines. Like someone told me, do this and you have a day to do it, that kind of thing. Even though that's not what an architect as a whole does, but that's part of it. That's when I started seeing, okay, dev, I love it. I still love programming, but I like to control what I do and what I don't do a bit more. And I also wanted to get wider into, okay, I don't just want to write this piece of code. I want to integrate with things. I want to drive bigger, like scale that not just includes Salesforce, but a lot of things around and a lot of moving parts. And that's when, with experience, and especially when I moved to the UK with the tequila, I think you have spoken to some of our tequila guys from back then. I was newer than some of them, I guess, but it changed, like that mentality and the projects we had and the team that I had around. It was really inspiring, and it was really interesting to gain that experience. And I had the trust from them to throw me in the deep end, always with support, but giving me more responsibilities. And that's when I made the switch. So we had an architect academy there as well, led by the guys. So that was really my switch was that. It wasn't a one day thing, and it's not a clear cut, but through experience and through getting exposed to more projects and getting more responsibility and taking it, because some people don't like that and don't want it, but I did, and I took it, and I'm very happy about it.
And here you are now.
There you go.
So I see a lot of people that will have technical architect on their CV, but when you dig a little bit deeper, like then they're in a developer role and they'll be calling themselves a technical architect. And we'll speak shortly around like what's the difference between solution and technical and so on. But what do you think someone needs to be doing day to day to warrant the architect title?
Sure. So as I said, like there are different types of technical architects. There are some more hands-on and less hands-on, but that's probably just relevant to the amount of implementation they do themselves, and not necessarily of the architect role itself. But I think being a technical architect includes more design. That's the first thing. It includes a lot of thinking about the bigger picture and the best practices, and setting up principles to the beginning, principles and best practices, and carrying them forward throughout, and making sure that they are respected. So there's also it depends as well of the type of project that you're in, but there's a lot of integration and a lot of making sure that Salesforce plays nice with everything. And especially now with MuleSoft part of Salesforce, you kind of have to now diversify a bit more into what you do in the integration space. But it's also about security. It's also about adoption, and it's also about methodology, which some people don't necessarily associate with technical architecture. But if you follow the right methodology with the right set of tools, with the right design, like things will go well most of the time.
Sure.
So that's kind of, it's a lot bigger, right? So when I have seen some people that say they are a TA, but they're more like a senior developer with some, like, management skills, but then they don't necessarily have that big picture. So that's my view, my difference. You need to know a bit of DevOps, a bit of integration, a bit of security, a bit of everything almost, but always looking at the big picture and at the right level, maybe not everything at
Sure.
lower level. So yeah, that's kind of my view.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of people, when they start doing some solution design, they think that's the role of an architect, because an architect designs stuff and therefore that's what I am. But yeah, I think when you talk about governance and structure and setting things up from the beginning, I think that's the part that a lot of people aren't necessarily doing, and they're not setting the standards. They're still delivering to someone else's standards.
Exactly. Yeah. So first thing, principles and standards, and big picture, and making sure that things are technically, as a technical architect. And again, as you said, we probably will talk about solution and technical in a second, but a lot of those things have to come together, and you have to be in control. And it's like crunch time. It's always at the beginning of a project to make things smooth for the whole project, and then right at the end to validate that everything. So it is very, very interesting, and it's key for any project of almost any size, but it is key. It's a key role.
Sure. Now, I guess now's a good time to cover it, because you're passionate about enterprise architecture. So there's enterprise architecture, there's solution architecture, there's technical architecture, and then you throw in all amongst this the certified technical architect certification.
Sure.
So what are the differences between, I guess, if we focus on enterprise, technical, solution, kind of unpack that for me.
Okay, we have like 3 hours. So yeah, enterprise architecture. I'm gonna start with enterprise architecture because people confuse a lot, like, enterprise architecture with technical architecture. So it's definitely not that. So enterprise architecture, in a nutshell, is the practice or the capabilities that you go throughout the enterprise, and it includes so many things. So you set the principles for your company, not just for your technology. You set your requirements as a whole for every department of your enterprise. There is in the framework, like I'm very familiar with TOGAF. I'm TOGAF certified. I'm not sure about the others, but I mean about the terminology. But in TOGAF, you have stages and phases for business architecture, data architecture, app architecture, technology architecture. So you can probably see already that technical architecture is just 1 out of 10 things that you do in enterprise architecture, and that's the main difference. So it's not that it's different, it's just that technical architecture is just a subset of enterprise architecture. And the same with solution architecture. And I don't know if you want me to also like make the that difference now, or we can stick to enterprise architecture a little bit. But solution architecture is also a part of enterprise architecture, and then governance is also a part of enterprise architecture, and migration and change management. So all of that is what I see. And then CTA is a technical architect that has the Salesforce certification. That's all it is. But to get to that certification, you need to know a lot of things, and you need to go through a lot of hoops. which is the beauty of it. So getting that certification is not an easy feat, and it's recognized, like it's industry recognized as a important thing, because all those hoops bring you to closer to like an enterprise architect than just a technical architect. So you can see how it's wider, how it's more rich as well, and there's a lot included in that.
Sure, it was interesting. I saw Seb was on Andy Mahood's podcast.
Yeah,
and he made a comment saying that he probably won't like me quoting this again, but he said if you bring him an enterprise architect, he could make them a CTA within 12 months.
I can see that. Yes, if they know Salesforce, 12 months. But yeah, definitely. So I can understand where he's coming from, and I agree. So especially with these days that the technology and Salesforce technology is also a bit more accessible, and it's kind of more recognizable for everyone than it was before. It was quite siloed, right? So yeah, a good enterprise architect with a good industry knowledge, they just need to know kind of the Salesforce specifics. So I agree. I understand that.
So then if we look at solution and technical architect, and there seems to be a lot of crossover in how people use those job titles. Like someone from a development background can now call themselves a solution architect, whereas kind of typically that might have been someone that's more functional. How do you see that on a Salesforce project now? Where do the lines kind of stop?
Yeah, that's a very common thing, and I see it all the time. So what I mean by that is that in Salesforce, especially in consulting, in the Salesforce world, there seems to be like a very defined difference. Or so there are some places where it gets blurry, but you kind of know what a solution architect is and what a technical architect is. But if you go outside of Salesforce, you probably don't have that anymore. So outside of the Salesforce world, like solution and technical architects are almost used like indifferently, like in place of the other. So it's very similar, and I've seen that in many projects where the client itself, they don't really know much about Salesforce and about this difference. And you say, "Are you introduced, chef? I'm a technical architect." Well, okay, they will call you a solution architect sometimes. So and that's fine, right? That's not a problem. In Salesforce, though, there is this view, as you said, and it's kind of widely acknowledged, that solution architects are more about business processes and how they translate functionally to like declarative features, right? And then when it comes into the more technical part, when it needs some apex or when it needs integration, when we're talking about security and identity and things like that, then that's when it starts migrating to the technical side. Very high level, very simplistic way of saying this, but there is that middle area where technical and solution architect need to work really hand in hand, and then it kind of becomes very different areas as well. So it is interesting, and it makes for good career progression, at least in my experience in consultancies. For people that are less technical, they could become architects, right? And they can become architects in Salesforce world, which they might not be necessarily that easy to do outside of Salesforce, right? So that's one good thing I see about it. But also you can see now, like these days, Salesforce is kind of driving, Salesforce as a company, they're driving the solution architecture certifications. They're gonna come, and they're kind of taking that into a different route in a way. They're saying this more multi-cloud plus some functional, but also a bit of technical. So it's interesting. I don't know exactly how it's gonna work out. These were early days of that, but I think we're probably gonna get more clarity. Hopefully, maybe it will become more of a mess. I don't know, but I think that's my view, right? So when it comes to integration, DevOps, things like that, code customization more to the technical side, and then business processes more functional, part of like a BA, senior BA, really on that area, and even with touches of project management, that's a solution architect as well. So in a nutshell, not everyone's the same. I know very good solution architects are also a little bit into dev, and vice versa. Technical architects are very good at business processes and things like that. But if you have to like put people in boxes, that's kind of what I think it would be.
Yeah. You made a comment there about that some people that can become Salesforce architects might not necessarily be seen as architects in the broader landscape of technology.
Sure.
And you said that's a good thing, but is that a good thing? Because sometimes when people they're maybe going for a role in a fintech company, and the fintech company is full of software engineers and architects, and then someone from the Salesforce world that isn't from that background turns up for a discussion around architecture, and they, like you said, they might not be an architect in the true sense of the word in the broader market. Is that something you see? Like, is that something that some people kind of have to overcome?
Yes, two things, right? So what I meant when it was good, it's kind of good for some like career progression inside of the Salesforce world, and in consultancies you kind of can grow to a point where maybe in some other, like just being a, I don't know, a BA, that doesn't give you that much progression eventually some other places, and that's kind of what I meant. And it depends on the company, it depends on the industry, but in my experience, in the way I see things, and focusing on Salesforce, and even in my past as a web developer. So that's kind of what I meant with it being good. Like you could progress more, earn more money, get more responsibilities, work in different sizes of projects. But you're definitely right. Like, because outside of Salesforce, things aren't so black and white. And as I told you, like when you see a job offering for a solution architect, but you actually need to be a technical architect in Salesforce to actually get that, like in the Salesforce world. So that is definitely challenging. And that's why I kind of mentioned this is a bit of a mess these days because of those kind of things, right? It's when you go outside, if you're a solution architect in Salesforce, you might want to change the role you're applying to when you go outside of Salesforce, not because you're not an architect, you are, and you're just like a Salesforce solution architect. That might not mean you are a JavaScript company based, like fintech, like a new technology startup. You're not a solution architect for them. But that also happens with technical architects in Salesforce that want to sometimes go out. Like, you pretty much know Salesforce, you know the technology, you know things around it, but they're looking for very different things outside of the Salesforce world as a TA as well. So yeah, that's one of the challenges of working in the Salesforce world and progressing a lot in the Salesforce world, that it can get sometimes siloed in that sense.
Yeah, because touch wood, Salesforce will continue on the path it's on and keep growing.
Correct.
But SQL probably looked like that at one point as well. And there are the Salesforce skills are so different to a lot of the other industry skills in the IT world.
Absolutely. That's getting more standard, thankfully, gladly as well. So Salesforce is doing more on DevOps. It's doing more on the the JavaScript space. Is open sourcing things. It's using open source things like platform events and things like that. They're using Kafka and kind of these kind of things give you more view into all other areas as well outside of Salesforce. The new feature that's coming up that are functions as a service, it's reminiscent of lambdas or Azure functions and things like that. So that's changing, and I saw one interview with Parker Harris, the CTO at Salesforce. He when they started Salesforce, he's like, I just want clicks, not code. I don't want code. I want Salesforce to be this thing. But they opened that up, like it changed a lot, and he was telling about his change of mind as well on that. So yeah, I think it is still challenging, it's still limited, but it's becoming easier to actually go out and into Salesforce. Like, as if you're a JavaScript developer now, if you are in this project or in this area where you're building a lot of Lightning Web Components, you can easily learn that because that's just JavaScript mostly with Salesforce salt on it. So yeah, it's kind of getting more standard, right?
I asked a JavaScript developer recently if they've been working in the Salesforce world for maybe 3 years now, and I asked them if they were going to get the JavaScript certification.
Sure.
And his response was, "Why would I want to be certified by a company that thought Aura was a good idea?"
True. I see no problem with that statement. But like, yeah, I'm not gonna say that I defend or will support everything that Salesforce does every time. That's not at all. And actually, another part of being a good TA, I think, is knowing when Salesforce is not the tool for the job. That's a massive part, actually. Like when Salesforce is like, no, you shouldn't use Salesforce for this. You should do something else and integrate. And that, yeah, Aura was misguided, I guess. I don't have a lot to say about that, but I do have to say that they realize it fast. So you don't see companies that are so fast to react. So it lasted for all about 1 or 2 years maybe, and they just ditched it. It's there, but like no one even remembers it anymore, almost.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there's good and bad, right, to everything.
Sure. So you are a Salesforce certified technical architect.
Correct.
You're one of a few, not many. How important was your computer science qualification, your background in computer science, to achieving that goal, in your opinion?
I think was massive. So I am a big defender of that, defender, well, of that. The skills that, at least in my uni, we learned were more than just the code, even though the coding and the structure of the programming languages in object-oriented, principles and concepts are still embedded here, like to this day, right? So and that's one part, but the other part is also the logical thinking. We had subjects of symbolic logic and like theoretical logic, just logic, and I didn't at the point, what does this mean, right? Like before you start learning algorithms, you start learning logic, and it's almost philosophical, right? And it's like, okay, why is this important for computer science? But it's very important. It changes your way of thinking, and I apply those things to almost everything. Maybe my wife doesn't like it all that much, but I apply that kind of logic principle to a lot of things. So that's one part, but also we also learn a lot about not just the science of it, but also the methodology, the processes behind it, the shipping of these things. I learned a lot about databases. I was deep into that, programming operating systems, all of that. When I think back, it's like even governance. So I think back, it's like all the even though it was cloud wasn't really a thing, but it's still in my view. I always come back to, okay, I learned this, learned that. These are the things that happen by reference. These are the things that happen by process, and I apply the methodology and the diagrams. Like the diagrams is really important. We learn to do sequence diagrams, flow charts, and all of that in uni, and I still use the like ERDs, all of that. Like, so I am a massive like supporter of getting a computer science degree. No questions.
So then what were your gaps as you were attempting the CTA? Like you had the programming side down and the logic and the diagrams and all of that, but what did you struggle with? Because everyone struggles with something, right? With the review board.
Yeah, like I started and I knew things, right? So the knowledge of like doing things in Salesforce, how do you write this code? I memorized it and I knew it and I used it, and it's really important for people to, when you're studying, to open up a dev org or whatever. And now in Trailhead it's easier, but Trailhead didn't exist. I just play with it and implement it yourself so you can learn it and kind of memorize it. And I had done a lot of stuff for projects, so experience is great. So that part was okay. I had some gaps on some licenses and things like that, communities and so on, but those are things that you study, memorize, and get the hang of it. My big problem was more about communicating the right things at the right time. It was more about soft skills and time management. So I don't know if people have said this before when you've asked them about the CTA, but time management is the most important thing for the actual review board. Nothing else is as important as time management and organizing and kind of having a plan and coming with a plan and executing that plan and not get frazzled and frustrated when things might not go because they won't go to according to the plan. So it's more about time management and reacting and soft skills. And it's about when people ask you a question, trying to be concise, concrete on your answer and asking right back, did that answer your question? And having that those little things, that's what I was missing. And I have to I always am very grateful for the people at Tequila like Wes and Andy and even Seb as well, James, all of them. So they were great mentors and they taught me all these things. And yeah, I couldn't have done it without them, I guess. Or maybe I would have needed to try a lot of times before I got it right.
But that must be probably the more frustrating thing that you need to focus on, right? Because everything else can be like, you can just study and like eventually, if it's a concept or it's a topic that you're just not getting your head around, you can ask people and you can explore that. But the soft skills and time management are things that sometimes they're difficult to coach. It's like one of those things that you sometimes you either have or you really struggle with. How did you focus on that and adapt?
So for the CTA particularly, but I have to say, like, just doing the CTA will make you a better TA as a whole, just preparing for it, even if you don't get it. I have to say that as well. I know a lot of people say that, but I also agree with that. But when we did the mock review boards, like the guys drove and were put you like exactly the same way you would do the review board itself. Back then, when you finish those, 99% of the time I would fail the mock review boards for different things, and they will stay with me and they will tell me like, do this, give me those tips. There's this one tip where just when you're presenting, stand up, don't sit down, chest out, sit down straight, that confident reflecting. So those tips and communication skills, that all of that was what made me better. And I did a lot of those with them, a lot of review boards, a lot of like mock boards. And then I started applying these things in my projects. I suddenly, when you're in a meeting room, we were in a meeting room back then, I wouldn't be sitting down anymore. I would be standing up, and I would die. And I noticed how people would react differently and would be more open. I remember in my action review board, there was a big question, and I told the guy who asked it, because I've worked with him afterwards. A big question: how do you do this and that and that and that? And my answer was data categories. Does that answer your question? Yes, that's it. 2 words. But just asking, does that answer your question? It avoided me having to do a massive explanation and waste 2 minutes or 3 minutes that I didn't have in the end. And I applied that for my projects, and I also applied that for everything. Even though I like to talk a lot sometimes, I also close that fast when I need to. So it's very, very interesting stuff.
So from the moment you passed the review board, what was next for you to learn? Like, what did you challenge yourself with next?
Well, family. So I had a kid. My kid was a baby back then. But yeah, so I in technology, apart from family, it's really focusing about alternatives. What does Salesforce do? How do other technologies do it? And try to compare as well. So learning about new technologies, everything innovative, everything everything that comes up and it's a trend, I will play with it and think of how will I use it with and around Salesforce if I can. So that's one part. I'm very passionate about integration and DevOps. So DevOps is a massive area where it doesn't really only relate to Salesforce at all. It's a culture, it's a way of thinking, it's a lot of things. I have like 7 articles in a blog that I started like a few years ago, 2 years ago, and then I never continued, but I did like 9 or 10 articles and 7 were about DevOps. So that kind of thing is what I've been growing on. And then it's like to make things, how can I innovate and how can I make it fast, scalable, and trusted? As well as like just food, brain food for me. I like playing around with things and realizing the things, buying gadgets at home, and maybe just implement an API that if I do something, my laptop turns on the lights and scare people. I don't know, whatever, right? So it's quite fun. Yeah.
You can, yeah, you must have some Halloween tricks.
Actually, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that, but I could do one for my daughter will love it, right?
Yeah, nice. So tell me about your role now.
Yes, so I am, let's say, like a senior architect slash head of architecture. So my actual title is head of architecture for the international Salesforce practice at Publicis Sapient. It's a very, very big role, name. But what that means is I do still do projects. It's usually the more complex or bigger scale projects though, and I can be managing other TAs. So that's kind of the senior part of it in a nutshell, very simplistically. But the key thing, one of the key things that I really enjoy now, and it's one of the things I'm focusing on to grow myself, is that you get to a peak on the technical, areas, right? Even when you can still learn and you still grow, right? But you have to be on top of the new features and everything. That doesn't change. But yeah, I've been doing it for ages, right? Over even if we count the freelance web development, I don't know, 15 years or more. Just doing, well, not just because I've done more in the recent years, but you get my point, like doing more of a focus on technical stuff. Now I'm focusing on like helping people to grow, helping people to progress, pay it forward, try to get people what I got from the guys at Tequila. Also like growing the practice, trying with mixed successes and failures, but trying to establish like a company-wide principles for all our projects. Trying to not trying, I implemented a technical design authority so that and I oversee it, and I do reviews of almost all our projects when I can. So that means all our proposals have a degree of quality, all our designs have a degree of quality, and we have different set of eyes, and our estimates were not selling short or high. Again, it's not an exact science, but there is a process, and I'm very proud of that. So that's a big part. And then working with sales efforts, and I'm, even though when I'm still less of a kind of commercially focused individual, I'm getting into that as well, little by little, because like things change, right? So things grow and evolve, and I want to try different things as well. So yeah, that's kind of my role right now, and that's where I'm going. Hopefully, we'll be CTO of the next big thing that I'm building with a friend, weekends and nights sometimes. So maybe, who knows? Maybe it'll blow up and you'll hear about it, all about it soon. And yeah.
Well, don't forget me when it does.
Of course, man. Don't worry about it.
So no plans to ever be a project manager again?
No, even though I work very closely with project managers these days, and I like that part because I don't have their responsibilities, but I like it's a joke, but I like telling people what to do. a lot as well. So there you go.
Yeah, nice. So one thing I wanted to ask, and a lot of your role, obviously, you're international, so you're not always in front of your customer. I guess a lot of your stuff anyway would have been done over video, but now that kind of everyone is facing the challenge of being an architect through a screen, what are the biggest challenges with that, and how do you find that you've been able to overcome some of those challenges?
Sure. I think it takes a lot of patience. I have to say right out the bat that I find it very efficient, and I really like it, like being remote and having these technologies, because people also like embrace them. Before then, you probably have people not embracing all that well the technologies, not not always realizing the value of the continuous integration or the automations and things like that. And now all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's key. So I think for DevOps and as a whole culture, not just like the continuous integration, but as a whole thing of projects going forward, operation, development, and even people collaboration, you can start to see how what we, because I'm not alone in this, we've been like ranting all over the place for years. Like, this is why it's good, this is why it's good, this is why it's good. So that's one thing that I do like. But on the other hand, yeah, sometimes you like that culture, uh, and the team building exercises that you do when you're battling in a room or something, that's hard these days when it's fully remote. So I think there has to be in the future balance where there's a percentage. It doesn't have to be a big percentage, but there's a percentage of team together in a room every once in a while, and not just socially, but when it's kind of crunch time, going to the production, things like that. That's where people bond a lot. So that part is a bit tricky, and because I talk a lot, and so in my job, I have to explain a lot of things, and I have to present all the time, and I have to whiteboard a lot. It's harder when I'm trying to explain something that in a whiteboard is quite easy. Now, not
Yeah.
everyone has the technologies, even though we at Publicis Sapient have a great one called Mural. If you haven't, check it out. That you can do some really cool whiteboard things, and it's collaborative and stuff. Um, but explaining some things when I have the diagram in my head, the logical thinking in my head, but people don't, right? So sometimes it gets frustrating, and I have to kind of explain over and over. Even if you put it in a document, it's not the same as if you are drawing in a whiteboard from the beginning till the end. People are kind of following the thought process. Uh, but
Sure.
that's kind of more on the kind of design, discovery phases and maybe presentations. And that's what I mean. Some percentage of things, small, need to be presential. It's better. But the day-to-day things, like most days, it's great, and people have to get more used to technology, have to make more use of conferences and collaboration and messaging and automation. So I'm happy on that side.
Sure. And because of the nature of your role working with lots of different customers across the globe, like
Yep.
not just, you're seeing a huge array of different projects. What's your favorite project to be involved in these days?
Without naming names, um, it's hard. But let's say that if it's less about the country, it's more about the scale and the team. So if it's a bigger, more enterprise architecture role with multiple different projects in Salesforce projects with a team with different architects and kind of overseeing the big picture and the enterprise architecture, that's my preferred role. About the countries, I always prefer going in my own time zone, uh, but you could do different time zones, no problem, as long as you set the expectations and the plan right since the beginning. So that's very important, and it
Sure.
could sound at the beginning as if you're not flexible or you don't want to do things, but in the long run, people appreciate it and understand that you're just honest, and everyone has a family, everyone has different things, right? So it's not a massive deal, and it's interesting to be in different cultures as well. So there are kind of these three things: the size of the project, the location, time base, and the cultural differences. So here in the UK, it's very different to the US. It's very different to kind of India base.
Sure.
I'm sure it will be different in Australia as well. But it's cool. It's
Yeah.
cool. I think the solution itself shouldn't change, but maybe the way in which you present and work with others might change, and it's great. It's the beauty of this world, I guess. Especially coming from a Venezuelan that lived in Spain, lives now in London. I'm actually, my family is half Italian, so I have the Italian citizenship. So there you go. I'm very mixed myself, and I like that.
Yeah, nice. Well, look, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed chatting. And you mentioned a blog that you're no longer running, but if people do want to kind of see that, or even just reach out and ask some questions, what's the best way to kind of contact
Sure.
you?
So LinkedIn is a good way. Also on Twitter. I'm not super active posting things, but LinkedIn is a very good way to reach out. If you check my blog, we can probably put some links somewhere around. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, mostly that Twitter, LinkedIn are the easiest way, but you can check out the blog. I promise I will go back to it because all these DevOps things have changed surprisingly little in some areas. So that's why I've seen it, and I don't want to change it yet because there are more things coming, and I want to wait for them to actually change and say, okay, all these problems we had, we don't have them anymore. That's kind of the revival of the blog. Is going to be something like that when it happens. But you can check it out. There's also one on Kafka and MuleSoft, and that I found really interesting. And there's two on enterprise architecture. One focus on principles that I really like, and I kind of use in projects as well. And then there's the how do I translate TOGAF framework into a Salesforce implementation, right? Kind of thing. So I found those interesting. I actually plateaued, and I didn't have anything better from then, and that's why I stopped. As well as I didn't have the time.
Well, you said you're coming back, so we're all waiting for that. So
Hopefully.
So yeah, we'll make sure we share those links, your Twitter and LinkedIn. But thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the chat, and look forward to seeing how the product goes and what the future
Absolutely.
holds.
Thank you very much, and I really enjoyed it as well.
Thank
All
you.
right.